Australia, the sixth largest country on Earth. An ancient, rugged, and unforgiving land with abundant animal life, both beautiful and deadly. Found within its awe-inspiring landscapes and natural beauty exists a deep history of unexplained mysteries for anyone with the courage to investigate them. Tonight, we join Ben on a journey across this vast island continent in search of answers to events that have reshaped the lives of so many that have been exposed to Unexplained Phenomena Australia. With your host, Ben Hurl.
Everyone, and welcome to another episode of Unexplained Phenomena Australia. Things are a little bit different this week because we're undergoing a renovation here at home, and my house has been stripped of furniture and flooring. So I'm kind of doing this a bit on the hop because I haven't had a lot of time to prepare this week. And as you can see, we've got an empty house with concrete and just bare, waiting for the guys to come back and lay the floor tomorrow. So you'll have to bear with me today as we go through these trying conditions at home, but I've still got an interesting episode in store for you. So as I've been doing this show for quite a few weeks now, I've found that there is just so many great examples in Australia of really high quality paranormal events. And we've looked at ghosts, we've looked at cryptids, we've looked at and predominantly at UFOs, which is my strength. And I've thought tonight I'd just do a bit of a walk around, looking at some of the cases that have been really interesting. And some of them are a lot of this stuff is still unknown. And some of it I have spoken about on previous episodes, but they're worth looking at again, as they are not well known. You can't just go out there and find these cases. They're not the Fred Valentich disappearance, the Kelly Cahill case, the Knowles family across Mundrabilla. They have been big cases in Australia. These cases that we're going to look at tonight are still very relatively unknown. So, and I found a really good one, which is from New South Wales in the town of Orange, which we'll kick off with. But I just wanted to go over again what I see is what makes a good case, a good paranormal case, an excellent UFO case. First of all, you need strange and unusual objects. Without them, that's not strange. So you've got to have something that's behaving very oddly and very differently to what we would see as either a natural phenomena or even a man-made object. And in all the cases we're going to talk about tonight, some involving entities as well, we will see that this is exactly what we've got: strange and unusual objects and or beings. And even within that, I like to see things that are even stranger again. In fact, the stranger it is, the better it is, in my opinion, because if it's strange, if it's not something that you can imagine, then that's a really good place to be when it comes to investigating. Now, a lot of these cases can also be very, you can have a lot of stuff that repeats as well. So, similar themes that will come up throughout UFO cases. And strange and unusual objects is definitely at the heart of it. Now, I also like to see physical evidence. We all love physical evidence. We all want something to look at. And when I say we, I mean the people who didn't see the UFO, the people who are hearing about it secondhand. And that could be investigators, the public, the media, any of those people or organisations, we all like to see good evidence. You can make up a great story, and the story may be great, but it's physical evidence that really does help tie a good UFO story together. And the ones we're going to talk about tonight all have that in common. There's strange objects, and in a lot of them there's physical evidence or physical effects as well, which is another thing. And we also like to see, if we can, multiple and ideally independent witnesses. That's great too, when you've got things happening. As we saw in Kempsey over the last 3 episodes, which I hope you enjoyed, there was a lot of independent and multiple witnesses, and that really strengthens a experience. Single witnesses are good as well if the single witness is credible and the story is believable and there is physical evidence to back it up. But there's nothing like multiple independent witnesses or multiple events occurring. And I also like to see something have a reasonable time frame for occurrence too, not just simply a flash in the sky. Flash in the sky is great, something zips across the sky. That was, how long did you see it for? 5 seconds, but it was strange. It's interesting, but there's not a lot that you can actually do with that as an investigator. I like to see reasonable time frames, a few minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever it is. That is really important. In fact, a sighting that I had with my sister and my brother-in-law, we watched multiple UFOs for an hour and a half. And my brother-in-law had watched it for 2 hours because he was watching it prior to me getting there. So anything that's going on for a reasonable period of time is something that I reckon is a good quality to have about any paranormal event. And you can't go past animal reactions. That gets me very, very excited when I see that animals have been affected by the presence of a UFO, a cryptid, maybe even a ghost. So animal reactions are very interesting, and particularly when the animals are reacting in, say, a stressed way or a confused manner, even scared. It indicates that, yes, there is something actually there, because the animals are also reacting to it. Cows, sheep. So we've seen cows, we've seen sheep, we've seen birds, ducks, geese. They all have reactions whenever UFOs are around as well. And similarly related to that, we have what's called affected environments. So environmental effect. What happened in the local environment? Well, it came down. We saw it. It came down. It made a whirring noise. It was spinning and it had lights. We saw that. But look, it actually landed on the ground. And it left 3 tripod marks and scorched earth and burnt vegetation. That's what it left. You can see it. We took photos. Come and have a look. That's the sort of thing that makes a paranormal UFO case really good. And it's when investigators should be getting excited and going out and having a look. But there's many, many challenges around this as well. The challenges of investigation, which we embrace because we do this because we love it, and we do it because we want to see something new, unusual, and different, and we want to be challenged by the evidence and by the experience. And I think for UFO investigators, that by far the biggest challenge is being there at the right time and the right place. That is just really so important if it can be achieved. And it's a lot harder for UFO investigators than any other paranormal investigator, in my opinion. Ghost investigators can go to the old asylum, they can go to the old hospital, they can go to the scene of a tragic accident, and everyone they need to talk to is in that environment right there. If you've got the right tools and skills, and perhaps you've got medium ability as well, and you've got all the gear, then you should really be able to find something pretty much where you pull up, and away you go. And cryptids is a little bit harder because, again, you've got to go traipsing out into a remote wilderness location, and perhaps you may or may not find something when you go out there. That's kind of related to ufology in that way. But the poor old UFO investigator has generally got no hope of being there when an incident actually occurs. He's always coming after the fact of the event and not experiencing the event that often. So that's one of the big challenges, because UFOs, flying saucers, UAPs, whatever you want to call them, and their pilots, the occupants, they can appear anywhere at any time. And that makes it very, very challenging. And the chances of you or me, the investigator, being available at that time are slim and next to none. Or the sighting is miles away and you've got all the logistical hassles of being able to actually go somewhere. So the UFO investigator is 100% challenged by those restrictions. And this is what makes me appreciate all these cases that I talk about each week is the fact that, you know, I'm trying to bring up for you to see cases that have all these things, all these elements that are attracted to them. So, you know, the chances of a UFO investigator being there on the spot are very slim. Opposite side of the state at 4 a.m., you're never going to be there. You know, that's where the ghost hunter has a much more distinct advantage over cryptid and UFO researchers. I've been looking for Bigfoot, or Yowies as we call them in Australia, and I've been searching for well over 3 or 4 years, and I've not found a single shred of evidence that they exist in my own multiple trips out to the wilderness. Haven't found anything in 3 to 4 years, but I still 100% believe that they are out there. And I've had UFO experiences, I've had ghost experiences, never had a cryptid experience. But I've put myself in all the locations where they've been reported, at day and at night, evening, afternoon, right around the clock. I've put myself out there, and I've never seen or heard anything that would indicate that I was in the presence of a cryptid. Other people have more luck. I obviously just haven't been lucky in that area so far. And it's like anything, you know, you can stare at the sky for weeks on end and you'll see nothing but satellites and planets. And then, you know, you're meant to see it or you're not meant to see it. I think that really comes down to it as well. You can plan to succeed as much as you possibly like to, but you still, at the end of the day, can come up short as an investigator. And it truly is the civilians out there who do have the experiences, who are in the right place at the right time, whether they want to be there or not. And the other thing too is that in the modern era, as I'm talking the 21st century, from the 2000s up until today, the physical trace cases have become infrequent. There's just not as many of them now as there was in the past. There's just some massive, massive periods of time in the past in Australia and around other places around the world where there's been many interactions from strange phenomena, and quite flaps as we saw with Kempsey, and also just years where there's heightened amounts of UFO activity. But physical trace cases, landing cases in Australia in the 21st century have been minimal, absolutely minimal. So I don't really know why in the 1970s they were on the ground all the time. In the 1960s they were landing all the time. They were following cars and trucks and stopping people and all sorts of things back in those preceding decades. But now we just don't seem to get those reports the way that we used to get them. And I think I'm not sure why that is. I'm really not sure why we're not getting the level of reports that we had in the last 50 years, with some really high flap years, 1966, 1978, 1972, 71, 1954 was another big year in Australia. So you get those sporadic big years and then periods of not much going on. And Australia, I think for the most part, is still in that cycle at the moment. And there's probably people that say, well, Ben, there's people seen UFOs here and there. And I say, that's great. That really, and it's wonderful if they have. But, and the information, perhaps, even though we're in a fairly big, small world these days with the internet and all the social media out there, you do see all the photos that get posted around the place, and and a lot of it is still just not that interesting. We're not having these cases where people are being followed for hours by some strange blue light, like it's not happening, or that the car is being stalled. All these cars that were getting stalled were in the 1970s and the 1960s, and maybe the new cars don't stall. I don't know. They obviously make them better these days with fuel injection and no carburetors and all that, like the old cars had back in the day. So that's an interesting aspect too, that physical trace cases have become infrequent. And so, and with that, I'm talking about, for example, the Knowles family whose car was picked up by a UFO crossing the Nullarbor plain. I'm talking about the Westall school incident where the UFOs landed on the ground and left trace marks there. Burke's Flat as well, with the bending headlights case. There was impressions in the ground. Thousands of cases with lots of impressions, but not in the 21st century so much. And one of the biggest challenges that we also face is that witnesses' knowledge of what they're actually viewing. I mean, that's really a crucial aspect as far as I'm concerned. Witnesses' knowledge of what they are actually viewing. Because you can see something mundane and you can explain it in a wonderful way that makes it seem to be more than what it is, and not just outright exaggeration, which certainly can occur, but it was a big light in the sky, and well, how big, like there's just so much to it that trying to detangle what a witness actually understands that they're looking at, and people like farmers are great because they're always outside. They know the weather, they know the birds, they know all that stuff. Police officers are good. Any pilots and those type of reports are great as well because they're all good trained observers. And it can be a little harder when it comes to the civilian who doesn't know as much as an investigator. So you've got to really work hard to get to the understanding the knowledge of the witness's capacity to understand and interpret correctly what they are actually seeing. Those misinterpretations are just big time wasters, and you can obviously get rid of things like the International Space Station pretty quickly, so there's things you can eliminate, but it can still be a real minefield when it comes to dealing with witnesses' impressions and what they say they saw. And one of my big bugbears is photos and videos. They really are they are just they're meant to help us in some ways, but in a lot of ways, a photo and a video is not as helpful or as useful as they appear to be. And I think I see a lot of junk photos and a lot of junk videos that are out there, and they're promoted around the internet all the time. They get plenty of views. The clickbait, as we call it, that sort of stuff is just, it's part of the story. They're part of the story. They can assist in the investigation, photos and videos, in that it may back up and support what you've actually been told. So that's about the best as it gets with a photo and a video. I don't think you're ever going to get the video that you go, wow, that is it. That is 100% pens down, everybody. This is the video that shows you, this is the video. I don't think that we're going to see that when you've got things like birds and insects and lens flare and anything that's shot over vast distances is prone to distortion, and the air currents can change it. It's about as sciencey as you could possibly ever hope to be when it comes to looking at photos and videos. And that's an area that I find frustrating more than helpful. But when you get a good photo, it's it's great. It is great when you get a good photo, but the point I'm making is that there's a deluge of junk photos and junk videos that are just either too dark or no reference points in them, too shaky, too just really could be anything that's being pictured. And I'm sort of probably really having a go at the social media sites where you see that. And I think that anyone who does investigations should really think hard before they actually share or post pictures, because the other risk you run is being torn to shreds as well by the trolls and the unforgiving out there who, when you put a photo up, they just want to rip it to pieces. So always be hesitant around photos and videos. I think generally in what I've investigated over 10 years of investigating, probably 12 years, there's very few hoaxes. It just doesn't seem to be a big issue in my opinion. I don't think we're in it's, like you can argue about CGI and CGI effects and people making little CGI videos to fool people and for their uni projects and all that sort of stuff. And, we all have we all enjoy it or whatever, or the footage is too good to be true. But the general idea of a hoax is, I just don't think it really washes a lot now. I mean, if you launch a Chinese lantern up these days, people pretty much know that for what it is. So, and no one's really dressing up in aluminium foil anymore, putting on rubber gloves and taking a photo in the dim light, pretending to be an alien on the side of the road. So, yeah, I think we've left hoaxing behind to a certain extent, and that's where the photos and the videos become tricky, very tricky, because you'll have the potential for hoax in that. But I just don't see it as being a major problem. And I have had hoaxes reported to me as well. 100% have had hoaxes. And one came to mind where we got told this great story about this boomerang object flying lower along a paddock next to a car or something like that. And I rang the phone number and it was a hardware store and there was no connection to anything to do with this apparent case. So the time wasters are certainly out there, but they're not the majority. And in the history of unexplained phenomena in Australia, we've seen a lot of photographs. We've seen a lot of the basic testimony of witnesses, and they are all really 100% in their integrity, I think, and feel that they are. You cannot. If you read as much as I've read, and if you follow this show for the time that's been going, you'll see that a lot of the reports, the witnesses are puzzled, perturbed, frightened, terrified. They don't know what it was. Nobody's getting rich on any of this stuff. No one. And you could have, if you did a report back in 1972, you're not going to get any money out of that. It's just there's no money in this. And I think that's another important thing as to why the hoaxes don't occur so much anymore, because there is no money in it at the end of the day. Unless you have a little alien who you've brought home and he is with you and you can take him and present him to the media, there's no money in any of this. So most of the witnesses and all the reports that I go through and check and verify and find as much information as I can. Anyone who watches the show knows I love my Google Maps. Always on Google Maps, looking at where locations were, everything like that. Haven't had the time this week to get into that with the renovations that are going on. But we will continue. So yeah, hoaxes and delusions. Delusion's another aspect that's interesting as well. Someone who is having delusions in terms of fantasy and perhaps mental illness at the more extreme end of that. That type of factor, I don't think figures in a lot of the stuff that we've looked at on this show. Those reports that we're seeing are definitely puzzled people who have got nothing to gain by coming forward with their reports. And I really appreciate anyone who comes forward and shares an incredible story and trust that you're going to listen to them, and not laugh at them. And I think we're getting well beyond that now. That's one of the beautiful things about paranormal research moving in and through the 21st century. I think the open-mindedness of the community is a lot better. And I think in recent times too, the media have also lifted their game a lot, because they can be terrible when it comes to the paranormal. It's either woo with ghosts and X-Files music with UFOs and green smoke and stuff like that. So it's just, I think we are moving beyond that. And that's a good thing for all the people who've endured the giggle factor in the past. And, we're moving beyond that now. And cold cases, which are my favourite thing to do, and why they're my favourite thing to do, because there's nothing much to do. We're not getting great reports now in the 21st century. So what do you do when you're not getting great reports? You can only look at the night sky for so long by yourself before you decide, well, we better go look at the old cases and see what happened in the past. And the challenges with that are witnesses move away, they die, completely lose interest in what they saw 30 years ago. Can happen. I have had that happen. But most people who you do contact still are very keen to to talk about it if you're showing an interest. And I've got an example of that coming up in a future episode. So stay tuned for that. And by the time, and the other thing too with cold case work, and look with any of that Kempsey stuff that I've done over the last 3 weeks, chasing up those witnesses. If I had the time to do it, I might try and make some inquiries about it. But you're talking 1971, 1972, 50 years ago. Look, people dead, moved on, lost interest. It's another state away from where I am. It's not practical for me to launch into a full, post-Kempsey 21st century breakdown. And I think that what we did over the last 3 weeks was certainly interesting enough to bring it back out into the light and dust it off and show you that, hey, something really big did actually happen in 1972 in the town of Kempsey for a few years there. So, and that's the best thing about the cold case work, is people can now enjoy it and revisit it and fascinate over what happened in the past. So, so for me, in many ways, the interest is in the archaeology of UFO research, rather than current day. Mind you, if something landed in the field next to me here, where I am right now, I'd be out the door like a bolt to go over and see what was going on. So I'm more than interested in being involved in current good cases. But the cold case work, I think, is where the reward lies. Certainly while we're in a quiet period for UFO activity. And the other thing I've you look at through every UFO report that we've looked at over, I'm not sure how many episodes I've done in the show. I actually don't keep track. Over 20 episodes now at least. There's majority of the people that have reported these cases have been probably generally non-believers, I would say, for those time periods that were back in the day, back in the 60s and the 70s. I don't think people were necessarily believers in it back then. Yeah, there's still plenty of pulp material around at that time, and sci-fi movies and comic books, and there was all that stuff was around in those eras, and people were probably influenced by it to a certain extent. But I don't think that you're necessarily dealing with every witness as being a paid-up, card-carrying UFO believer prior to their experience. I think a lot of them were probably non-believers or didn't think about it. But since they've had the encounters, the Kempsey encounters are, again, as an example, I'm a believer now. I saw something. Seeing is believing. I won't believe it until I see it. I know what I saw. All those cliche terms that you hear around, when the penny drops that, yes, there actually is something going on. I've seen it. It's changed my worldview. If you see it, it'll change your worldview as well. And the other point that's interesting too is that exaggeration, I don't think, is a major problem in a lot of the cases, because it gets back to someone's motives for reporting an incident. Are you reporting the incident because you were puzzled, terrified, didn't know what was going on, and you want to share it with other people? I think that's generally the motivation for people to share something. And if you have to rely on exaggeration, then I don't think that's something that's going to really sort of get you anywhere. And in some ways, I think it's always exposed as well when it comes to exaggeration. So that's some of the challenges that all these cases that we've been looking at over all these weeks that they present. And the biggest challenge of all is finding them. That is the biggest challenge, because all of these reports are in so many different formats. They're in newspaper articles, which I love, and I believe that they are the history of the paranormal, and UFOs particularly. The newspaper articles are the history, 100%. But that's only one aspect of it. The other aspect is UFO group records and reported sightings. That's hard to access unless you're a member of the group. And if the group is disbanded, well, you've got a really next to no chance of getting your hands on any of that data to have a look at. I've been lucky. I've been able to track down some, and I mean some records from the old Viewforce days. I inherited a couple of filing cabinets that were looking for a new home, that were full of stuff, and I was lucky enough to get it. And a lot of the material that we talk about on this show comes directly from those old files from Viewforce, the old Victorian UFO group that was around for a very long time, since the early 50s. But that's only fragments of information. The totality of their information would be a lot vaster than that, and the records are scattered to the winds. They're gone. They're out there. They've been thrown out. They've been hoarded by other people who aren't that willing to share the information that they've got for their own reasons. So finding the information is a big challenge. Then you've got the good old interweb, the internet, with vastly varying levels of accuracy and fidelity of information that you can find on there. There are great research sites and there are terrible sites. There's good information and bad information. So, so finding these cases, finding these reports to talk about is a huge, huge challenge that is each week. And each time you come across a little nugget, you pick it up and you love it and you stick it in the store for another episode. So that's kind of, and the other side of that too is that, like finding information is one thing, all the scattered sources that are out there to try and track them down. People who withhold information, don't share it. So that's difficult. I've been pretty lucky myself. I've had a lot of information shared with me, which I'm very grateful for, anyone who does share information, because I believe in sharing information too. But not everybody does. So, information does get censored or just withheld outright. You can't access it, which is, I think, obviously the biggest offender of that is the governments. So, information is held, classified for long periods of time, declassified, redacted, give you some of it, but not the good stuff. It's very, very challenging to try and find the information in those environments. A lot of stuff's been released too, so it's not Not as bad as it was, I don't think. But I mean, if you were investigating back in the old days, it was very difficult to access information. And next week's guest, we're having a guest on next week's episode. He was fortunate enough to get to investigate the Royal Australian Air Force's UFO archives. So we might have a bit of a chat about that next week. So a little bit of a tip there. So I wanted to talk about a couple of cases that I've had still in my little cookie jar of cases. Now, again, they're in the days, they're in the 20th century. Let's just put it that way, in the 20th century, not the 21st century. We're going to talk about one now that is from January 1986 in the New South Wales. We've been really focusing on New South Wales over the last few weeks. The New South Wales town of Orange. So Orange, and that's just like the colour or the fruit. So this is where Orange is. So if you look at that map, you've got Sydney off to the central right-hand side of the map, and then you've got where that little red dropper is, that's Orange. So it's kind of heading towards getting out towards the red, it's not in the red desert section of New South Wales, but it's kind of over the dividing range, and it's basically out, heading out into country New South Wales, and Bathurst is just nearby as well, which is where the famous car race is that was on last weekend. So that's that area where this occurred, and then you've got Newcastle back over on the coast above Sydney, Wollongong South, Nowra below that. All that's very interesting, and Kempsey was up above that Tamworth area at the top of the map. So that's just a bit of geography on the New South Wales area where we're going to be talking in a minute. So what happened in January 1986? Well, 4 young people encountered a UFO the size of a car, and they went hysterical and began shaking. And the police in Orange, who spoke to them after the sighting, said that they were highly excited to almost hysterical by the reaction that they had had to what they had seen. And the police stated that it's a legitimate sighting as far as we can tell. January 1986. Now, a young man, Robert Wren, 21 years old, his sister Joanne, who was 17 at the time, which was the same age as me at that time, and their friend Sharon Kelly, who was 17, and another friend, Jeffrey Isles, who was 16. All of them of the township of Orange told police that they saw a UFO at 11:30 p.m. Now, Robert Wren said that just as he was about to see a friend home, he noticed horses in a nearby paddock running wild and making strange noises, as though they were uneasy about something. Well, there you go. I love that instantly. We've got horses that are running around wild and making strange noises because they were uneasy. Love that. And he said when he glanced up into the sky, he saw a huge flying object that looked neither like a plane nor a helicopter. And he just couldn't work out what it was and how it was suspended up in the sky for so long. And that's a very common theme in UFO reports. People just are amazed at how something can just sit there hovering in the sky with no noise, no rotors, and just sit there. Fascinating stuff. And he said it had no wings, no rotor or propeller. So he's obviously looking at something that's not 1986 technology. And he said the object would have been about 50 metres above the ground, and he described it as being no bigger than a motor vehicle. Let's call that a car, shall we? And he said it was a round oval shape and was covered in red lights around the base of the craft. And he said he first got sight of it as it seemed to hover across the nearby paddock or field. Paddock's a very Australian term. Field might make more sense in North America. So he first got sight of it. It seemed to hover across the nearby field and appeared from out of nowhere over a hill. You had to see it to believe it, is what he said. And he said it was a perfectly clear night and the craft was clearly visible. And he said that the whole sighting lasted about 2 minutes. And once the craft landed on the ground, its lights turned from bright red to a pinky crimson colour. So slight change of colour lights when the object landed. Its underside had a large, bright, revolving red light surrounded by 20 fixed lights. And I'm not sure whether he counted 20 lights or whether it's an estimated 20 lights, but we'll go with the fact that there was 20 lights around the outside of it. And he ran to the house and he told the others who came out, and they also saw this strange apparition, object, UFO, if you like. And he said it appeared to land in a park at the end of Spring Street in Orange near the local showground. And Robert said he was stunned when he first spotted the object and he just stood there motionless. He had never seen anything like it before. And that ties into what I was talking about before, how people have this reaction to these sightings. It's like, it changes their whole world when you see something like this. I'd never seen anything like it before. You hear those words time and time again. What it was, I do not know. You'll hear all those type of statements coming out of witnesses. And he said the sound was coming from the craft seemed to be similar to that of a car engine that was badly run down. Now that's interesting, isn't it? Like it sounds like a car engine that was badly run down. So was this thing in apparent trouble, or did it just make that noise like that? And he's just assuming to him it sounds like a badly run down engine, but it was obviously working pretty good. And at the landing site, there was flattened grass over an area of 2 meters wide and 4 meters long. So here we've got our physical trace evidence. So we've had horses running around going crazy. We've got near hysterical 21 and 17-year-olds. We've got a landing object with 20 lights, a red rotating light underneath it. And we've got a flattened grass over an area of 2 meters by 4 meters long. And the object moved off in a southerly direction at a fast speed, stopped. So it's taken off, it's stopped, and it's hovered for a while, as you would expect. And it then sped off again. Travelled about 3 kilometres, estimated 3 kilometres, to the eastern side of town before disappearing. Now, Mr. Wren contacted the local TV station after the sighting, so it obviously made an impression on him. And the television report that followed said that he and his three friends had appeared hysterical and had to be calmed down. And an immediate police patrol failed to find any trace of the UFO. Now that's interesting too, because that happens quite a bit too, that, something will be seen, something will have landed on the ground, and there's just no sign of it. So that's quite common. But in this case, there was actually a ground trace on the ground, 2 by 4 meters. Now, police questioned all the witnesses and the stories matched, and they didn't appear to be affected by alcohol or drugs. So that is fantastic. We don't like our witnesses affected by drugs or alcohol. And police in the town of Orange were kept busy checking all the alleged sightings of the object. So there was more sightings, not just Mr. Wren, his sister, and a couple of friends. There were other people who also saw the object. And Sergeant Chuck Ruskov said that all sightings were being treated as legitimate until proven otherwise. So, as far as the police were concerned, they took it seriously. You get one of two reactions with the police. They either will treat it seriously or they'll just think it's stupid. So in this case, they took it as being serious, which is wonderful. And he said, otherwise, after so many calls they had, one has to treat the matter seriously. And interestingly enough, spokespersons for the civil and the defence departments, January 1986, said they were not doing anything about the reported sighting. Well, that's no surprise, is it? They were not going to, the civil authorities and the Defence Department were not going to do anything. I can tell you why, because there's nothing they can do. So I have got a couple of photos here as well. So this was the witnesses, just to bring a bit of reality into it. So this was in the local paper up in Orange at the time. So that is Mr. Wren and his sister. And they're holding the picture that they drew of the object that they saw. And this is the blow up of that. So here we go. We've got that big red light that he was talking about that's underneath it. We've got the sort of lampshade shape of the whole appendage. And on the bottom, you can see a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 or so of those 20 lights that were running around the rim of that object. And also in the newspaper clipping, they had this, which was just not so much a summary of that sighting, but just showing where other UFO sightings had been seen in that around New South Wales. And the years obviously vary a little bit there. But basically everywhere significant there features. You've got Nowra, you've got Lithgow, you've got Forbes, you've got Mudgee, you've got Newcastle, you've got Coffs Harbour, Taree, and Taree is another one I'm going to talk about in the future as well. So you've got that as that. And I got onto Google Maps. This was back before our house was turned upside down to do renovations. And because I was actually going to do this one last week, but ran out of time and doing it this week. And this was the location where that little lampshade object with the red lights landed. So it was basically in where it says Hill Park, in that green section at the top right-hand side of the Google Map image. That is the area where the craft came down with the 2 by 4 metre impression on the ground. Now I zoomed in, but as anyone who knows on Google Maps, the resolution is absolutely dreadful the closer you get. And after all these years, I don't think we could conclude that there would be any remnants of that left at that location now. So that's interesting. So that was an interesting case. Now, going back a few years, there was another sighting in Orange as well, same town, but this is in May 26, 1978. So going back, and interestingly, that's to the same year as the Fred Valentich disappearance, because he disappeared on 21st of October 1978. This is prior to that. This is in the 26th of May 1978, and a different state, but it shows that there was a lot of activity at that time. And just on midnight, a boy observed a brilliant white elongated light source on or near the ground. He couldn't be sure. On a hillside near the farmhouse in which he lived. Horses and dogs in the area became agitated. Love it. That's what we want to see. Aggravated horses and dogs all becoming agitated because there's something strange in the area. And the light source, and there appeared to be 4 white lights in a row, slowly began to increase in brilliance. So the light started to increase in brilliance. After achieving extraordinary intensity, the light began to wane and it took on an orange or red hue, then extinguished itself. And the boy's mother also reported seeing a bright illuminated object. It had 4 square windows along its side. Another independent sighting served to confirm the incident. And the next morning, for clearly defined indentations on the ground served to confirm that the incident was real and genuine. So that's very exciting. And here we have the drawing of that object. So the UFOs seen by a boy in orange in 1978, that's what he was actually looking at. And that's what he and his mother described as seeing. So cigar-shaped, 4 rows of lights, increasing in intensity, and we've also got a ground trace evidence there as well. So we're ticking all those boxes for Ben's favourite things to have in a UFO sighting. And we're just about running out of time, but there was another sighting from Grafton, which is up on the coast, a little bit just above Sydney. I don't have a Google Map image of that location because I haven't had the time to do it. And this sighting was on the July 1st, 1978. So again, in the Fred Valentich disappearing year, going outside to investigate a disturbance involving cats. No dogs or horses this time, but we've got cats that are being disturbed. At 3:15 a.m., a woman observed a huge orange gold disc in the northeast sky. It was about twice the relative size of the full moon, and it was hovering, and 3 beams of light extended from the underside, and 2 thin searchlight beams of orange gold light were also visible at each end. And after about 15 minutes, the object began to move in a northerly direction and then speeded up until it eventually disappeared, and the sighting lasted 20 minutes. There you go. So we've ticked off strange object, we've ticked off cats that have been irritated by this thing appearing, we've ticked off a unusual and strange object, and we've had a sighting that lasted for 20 minutes. So that's brilliant. And that is this object here. So this was the huge orange gold disc-shaped object at Grafton, had beams of light and 2 searchlights extending from the underside and from each end. So isn't it interesting when you look at colours in UFOs? Like, what's all that about? They change colour. They'll go from a yellow to an orange to a red, and then even turn to a green or a blue. So, it's just, I really am fascinated by the colour changes that you see, the lighting structures that have been reported, and how, perhaps most interestingly, is how different they all are. So, we talk about reports being varied and different, and there must be 1,000 different types of craft out there. Well, I think there is. I think that's definitely the case. And these reports have shown, just in the couple that we've talked about, that, the light colours vary so much, and even the whole objects will change colour. But you can just imagine that golden object with its search beams coming down and 3 lights coming underneath it. It would have looked absolutely fantastic. So that's really interesting. But we are nearly out of time for this week, and for a show that I've only thrown together with not an ounce, or barely a skerrick of preparation, other than some of the leftovers I had from last week. I think we got there in the end. And next week, joining me on Unexplained Phenomena Australia is a absolutely fantastic special guest coming in to talk about some of these cases and other cases that he's investigated. Is a long-time Australian UFO researcher, Bill Chalker. So if you know anything about Australian ufology or Australian UFO research, Bill has been around it for a very long time, and he is a fascinating and thoroughly engaging researcher to listen to. I've got a picture here. This was back in the younger days. So that's Bill back in the 70s, when I think he was doing the Kempsey investigation. So we look forward to having him come and join us next week. So I hope you've enjoyed the show, and I really do look forward to seeing you next week when Bill joins me And take care. Have a great evening. I'll see you then.